we're still struggling to figure out what is the new and how people go back to the office. It's so radically different. It really is kind of almost shocking. You can have a mandate that says, you need to be in a certain number of days, but when you do it right, they want to come. It's really important for them to understand why it matters. And how do we get people to want to come back? And that path became wellness. I think that's what's so radically different, so that it's a space that people want to come to. And they wanted to create a culture that was compelling enough that people would choose to come together even when they didn't have to. And when I think about what the future of the office is, it's that.
Wendy, welcome.
Thank you, Bob.
I'm excited to have you here and have this conversation.
I'm really honored to be here. If I can add at this point was, I've done some other articles with work design, and so kind of this continuation of it is a real honor to be here.
I wanted to start out by asking you how you got into wellness. I think that you're recognized as having one of the first projects that achieved both WELL and LEED certifications, which is quite impressive. And I'm curious, what led to that? What motivated you to get into the whole wellness and sustainability thing from a real estate deal standpoint?
Well, Bob, it was actually an accident. I had a client that reached out to me that said that for their new office, they wanted to do platinum. That's all I heard. And I thought they meant LEED. And it turned out they said, no, WELL and LEED platinum. I'd never heard of it. And so it really put me on a journey, and it's one of those things where I had an aha moment, and I leaned into it, and I figured out how to get it done. I had a whole team of people, including the owner of the building that we went to, the project manager, the general contractor, even the architect, who had never done one of these deals, most of whom, with the exception of the architect, hadn't even heard of it. So I had to figure out how we navigated it, and I came out from that all energized. And I one might say, drank the Kool-Aid and really believed in it, because it just made sense. I'm a really practical person. So when I learned what it really meant about biophilia, which is a big word, really it just means nature, whether it's materials people choose, having plants and things of that sort, it just makes people feel better. Natural light, air quality, water, filtration, all of those things weigh into it. And so it put me on a journey, and I came out excited to share my newfound knowledge with the world. In 2017, they were the first in the world to achieve WELL and LEED Platinum. Unfortunately, at that time, I didn't have a lot of people in the community and nationally that cared that much about it. I was kind of surprised. I kind of went out by myself on this mission to educate and inform, because that's sort of my servant leadership model. But sadly, no one cared that much. And then I guess one must take a gift where it comes, and the pandemic, all of a sudden, people were really trying to figure out what's happening. Air quality obviously was front and center, and how do we get people to want to come back? And that path became wellness. And so my knowledge from that just springboarded, and it's really shaped and influenced my career, probably one of the most defining moments of my career.
That's impressive. And I'm curious now that you've been through a few of these projects, how do you see that evolving? How do you see, people reacting to, well-being and to, sustainability as you're looking at these projects?
I have seen a sharp rise in it during the pandemic, and I've seen it both on the landlord side and the tenant side. And I think it's important to differentiate between the two, because when I finished the ASID lease, I really went, I've been in this business for a really long time, and I shared my knowledge with a lot of local owners, and they were really curious. I mean, I remember educating early on Dave Ritchie of JBG, now JBG Smith, what that really meant, and my partner on the ASID was Carr, and they were really at the forefront. And seeing now how organizations like BXP and others have really come to embrace it and put it into the base building, I think has been very critical. And I have not been shy in my thought leadership of educating occupiers, both clients, people I would like to be my clients, on what it really means and why it benefits them. So I think that we've seen a great job, for example, by the International Well Building Institute of what they did and their pivot during the pandemic of recognizing a need and meeting the market by creating the well health safety program. That was really revolutionary. They came up with a 1-year certification that could help people get back. And as they've also evolved, they've created different things such as Well at Scale that could include that as well as a well certification. And then the counterpart also with the with Fitwel, Center for Active Design, came up with their own version of that. I feel we're at a little bit of a tipping point, though. The Fitwel folks are sunsetting, although it's not publicly put out there a lot. I've been told at the end of this year, their Fitwel Vital Response, and they'll just have Fitwel, which is a 3-year certification. But Well is not, and that's staying out there. And I think it matters more than people realize, because we're still struggling to figure out what is the new and how people go back to the office. So it's there, and the focus on sustainability is critically important. It started through ESG, but we've also seen the evolution of the talk of wellness as now becoming more social sustainability, which is just another acronym.
You mentioned I guess the two sides of the deal in it, and I think that was one of the reasons why I'm excited to talk to you, because I think you're unique among your peers. And I'm curious, from your perspective, do you feel like that actually facilitates deals getting done, or do you think there are challenges and hurdles that you have to get over to incorporate those concepts into a deal?
I think you know that I'm going to say it's both. I think that there are so many challenges right now in getting transactions done, but a lot of it goes back to that early planning. And if I know that a client is interested, and anyone that works with me will hear me harp on it, so usually they'll say, tell me more, they'll want to understand it early. And so that goes into defining what their goals are, building the right team, which I know we'll be talking a lot more about, and then matching that up with what the opportunities are in the market. Because one of the things I didn't mention to you is what could bridge what a landlord does and what a tenant does. We don't see a ton of tenants looking necessarily to pursue a wellness certification on their space as much. It's sort of like LEED. Things have evolved, and you, of anyone, can address that more, but there's less focus on tenants securing LEED certifications on their space because it's sort of built into your design. And I think over time, that's where I see the evolution, that there's more focus on these items that help employees with their well-being, help occupiers get their employees to want to come back. But it's figuring out what that is, and then I often talk about drafting off the base building, and that's where I come in pushing landlords, and particularly their brokers, to explain what they've done, what kinds of certifications do they have, what are they going to maintain, and then making sure that my clients understand what that is and how they can weave that into their own narrative, whether they choose to pursue a certification or not.
Yeah, that's interesting, because I think we see tenants, it really comes down to their values. And I think most tenants want to create a healthy, sustainable space. And that's more important to them than the actual certification. But I think on the landlord side, it's the opposite, where the landlord in some way has to certify that the building meets a certain criteria.
Mm-hmm. Well, and we've also seen, particularly for publicly traded REITs and others that are not public but care about it, that they're being their ESG ratings, their sustainability reports. In the past, I used to look, when I was looking for information on a company, I would look for their 10K. I still do, but now I look for their sustainability and their ESG report, because it's just chock full of information about what they're doing. And nothing makes me happier than when I go up to a building and I see whether it's the Well seal or the Fitwel, Energy Star, all of those things. But so often they don't do a very good job of communicating what they've done and why it's relevant. And that's sort of the soapbox that I find myself standing on.
How do you find is it fairly even across the industry, or do you find certain groups are much more aware and much more prepared, and others are maybe not so?
I think the larger institutional ones are definitely at the forefront, just because they're being evaluated. It can affect their stock price. They want to be talking about what they're doing. If they are looking to have a corporate portfolio of, in terms of the roster of tenants, that's important. I think when you look at some of the wellness certifications at IWBI's website, and you look at like, the financial institutions, the Deloitte's, the Chase, JP Morgan Chase, a lot of those have been leaning in and embracing that. And I think then going to a building that further supports that is important. One of the ones that I've been talking a lot about recently as an example is what Brookfield has done. Brookfield has been very public, for example, in the DC area, that their portfolio is being powered by nuclear. Well, I don't think people really understand what that means, and one of the things that I've strived to do is to demystify things, sort of like I mentioned with biophilia. And so I recently did a post on what does it mean if a building's powered by nuclear, and not many people were focusing on how a tenant can use that information to talk about that that they've chosen a building that's using clean energy, but also what is the impact on their costs. There are some, and so we need to kind of tease that out in this evolutionary period.
I think we're seeing, I'll say, a lot of challenges or changes in the market now, and things like flexibility and the hybrid work environment now have taken a much more prominent role. And I'm wondering how those things are playing into what you're seeing in the way that landlords are delivering spaces and the healthy aspects of that.
Landlords are definitely more focused on that. We see a lot more speculative suites being designed because they're trying to figure out what might be more universally appealing, but it will also shorten the time to get a tenant in there if it's already designed and built. But they're trying to build into those spaces things that tenants want that it's changed since the pandemic. I mean, sure, in the past people always cared about good light, access to daylight and such, but it's even more important. So when you look at some of the spec suites, the preponderance of glass, really good lighting, air quality, really matters. And then thinking about how they design spaces that will foster more community. You think about in the past, spaces would have the pantries kind of in the back, not on the window. Now it's front and center. I kind of think of it at what Starbucks has done in terms of creating that feel of it, and people want, I think, also choice. They want to know that there's different places where they can congregate. So if it's in the space, or for some smaller spec suites, we're seeing more and more landlords do what we'll call like a town hall, where they'll have several different conference rooms and lounges that those tenants can use and not have to carry that in their space. It also provides them flexibility if they're growing, that they're not locked into a built-out space for 10 years, and that they can move, hopefully, within that landlord's building and or portfolio.
You talk about some of the amenities in buildings, and I feel like there's an amenity war that goes on. What are you seeing in terms of the most desirable amenities that tenants are looking for?
I would say hands down, it is the conference center with kind of plural, not a conference room, but people want to know that there is a space that can be used in a variety of configurations. It can be subdivided, it can be set up with tables or theater style, and also on light. I recently hosted an event at Meridian's building at 1333 New Hampshire, and their rooftop of indoor and outdoor space is probably one of the best in the city. And I think it really helped them in their ability to lease up their space and use it as a tool to help their tenants bring their employees in. It's got soaring ceilings, it's all on the window. There's an area outside of the conference room where people can convene with different types of seating, and then encircling it is a outdoor terrace space. And people want to be able to get outside and get fresh air, but also to see outside. The other thing is tenant lounges elsewhere in the building. Fitness facilities in the past used to be oftentimes only in the basement, and you had to pay for it. More often than not, we see them above ground, and we see that there's no cost for it. I joke one of my metrics is how many Pelotons they have. I'm a cyclist, but when I'm not outdoors, I'm using my Peloton. 2 is the norm, 4 is ideal, but tracking that, and then just the choice. Tenants want other spaces that they can come together outside of their space, and I've seen landlords rise to the occasion, and that for the most part, they're really in a whole different category and being left behind if they don't have some of this.
How about the use of space? Because I think there's a lot of dynamic change happening now and how tenants are thinking about the space and the way that you're using it. I'm curious what you're seeing, with the tenants that you're working with.
It's so radically different. It really is kind of almost shocking. And I think that before the pandemic, and you can address this far better than myself, but we really were going to more and more open plan. And I think the pandemic, for a whole host of reasons, has altered that. People are more willing to go to smaller but private spaces. They still want the choice of different spaces where they can come together and collaborate, but it's a whole myriad of different things. And I don't think that we're going to see the Zoom go away, whether it's Zoom or Teams. It is an integral part of how we do business, which means it's harder if you're sitting out in a workstation to have a conversation, particularly if you're sitting near me, because I'm really loud. But I think that we need to give people different choices, and that has influenced it. And people want to look at the office as a destination. I think that's what's so radically different, and that's where we're partnering up with the architects to be thinking about this so that it's a space that people want to come to. It's an intentional choice. Yes, Amazon's warranted that people have to be in 5 days a week, and we are expecting that the federal government may be mandated to come back in full time, which I think at some level having them in more would really, particularly for the DC area, help a lot. But people do want that choice, and they want spaces that feel good. And I will say that for our clients who have signed new leases or done a major renovation, their desire to make that change and get it done soon is really interesting. They're like, how fast can we get it done? Because they know if they have a new space, it's going to really help them with building culture and getting people to come in, collaborate, have happier employees, which ultimately can result in greater productivity, and let's be real, profitability.
I'm curious, there's a lot of conversations around mandates, and I'm just curious what your tenants are looking for in terms of the way they're thinking about the space.
I would say that a lot of people have kind of gotten to a point where that 3-day is the norm. They really talk a lot, both Farmer Mac, FINRA did, presence with purpose. A lot of it comes down to intentionality, and that's really kind of changed how we think about things. I think that I don't see that there will be a time for most organizations where people are mandated to be in 5 days a week. And the hours that they work, I think I shared with you when I came in this morning, it's a Tuesday. Traffic is very undependable, in particular Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. Monday, it's wonderful. But it's not like rush hour the way we knew it was between, maybe 7 and 9 and 4 to 6. It can be all day. So I think a lot of that has changed. I do think Fridays for most organizations is a hard day to get people in, but I think in general 3 days is where it's at. And one of the things that we did a ton of during the pandemic were surveys. I think we're kind of past a lot of the surveys. I think people have survey fatigue, yet occasionally we'll do a survey. We have a pretty robust legal practice group that will periodically do different things on trends and take the pulse of where law firms are now. And there still is interest, but it was so much surveys during that. And a lot of it was led by our workplace group, which has been an integral part of trying to help understand what people are doing.
You mentioned Farmers Mac, and I'm curious, that's probably one of the more recent, more innovative projects, if I could sort of capture, put that into a category. So can you tell us the story behind Farmers Mac?
So Farmer Mac is an organization that's headquartered in Washington in the agricultural space. And interestingly enough, our interview with them was the week that the pandemic shut everything down. I think it was like March 10th. And it was one of our last in-person meetings, and we knew there was stuff going on, but we weren't sure. But my partner, David Cornbrooks, had been following them for a number of years, and we were afforded an opportunity to come in and interview. And that's kind of when I think about my own journey on wellness is like, you hear from me whether, throughout an opportunity for a pursuit, as well as like in that formal presentation, to talk about something that I think is a differentiator that they should think about. And it really resonated with them. So at the end of the day, They ended up leasing 21,000 square feet in a new building in Washington that BXP delivered, where Wilmer Hale has their headquarters. And there was so much thought into what they wanted in the building. So early on with our workplace team in evaluating what their needs were, when we brought in an architect, partnering up with them, and then using that lens for the site selection, buildings that had floor to ceiling glass, state of the art air quality, filtration, all of those amenities that we talked about, not just one conference room, but a conference room that could be reconfigured in a lot of different ways with a great lounge area where people could come together, soaring ceilings in their lobby. And I have to tell you, I was so excited when they told me that they were going to go ahead and pursue not just a LEED certification, but a WELL certification. Because as I shared with you, not that many tenants are actually pursuing it. They may say that they've designed it to a certain WELL standard, or they may think about it, but to actual do it, and they just applied for LEED and WELL Gold. And their CEO, Brad Notham, is really quite a visionary, and his whole team, Catherine Burr and Jen, really kind of led the forefront. And to me, they understood what I talked about. They have embraced it. And I'd like to actually, if you don't mind, because I can't remember all the details, he gave a few quotes which absolutely captured it perfectly. And it talked about choosing a space designed to mirror the commitment to a strong workplace culture and sustainability based on their presence with purpose, the hybrid work model designed to balance flexibility of remote work with the cultural benefits of in-person collaboration. And when I read that, when their CEO put that out there, it really hit home. And this is the other part that I think captures a lot of what you're looking for. Their office offered an airy, attractive environment to promote employee well-being and prioritizes natural materials and sustainable design principles. And they wanted one that prioritized energy efficiency, tenant health, and clean operations, and it was top of mind. And they want an office that's adaptable, collaborative, and inclusive, that enhances productivity while supporting their employees. I mean, I can't think of a better advertisement for why somebody should want to do it. And when their employees moved in, people want to come into the office. You can have a mandate that says, you need to be in a certain number of days, but when you do it right, they want to come in.
That's great to hear. I'm curious, how do you guide your tenants through that process? I mean, what's important for them to understand?
It's really important for them to understand why it matters and what's involved with it. And so, again, I harp on this, but it goes back to being intentional early on and explaining it and managing expectations about what it means. And so if we do that up front and we know what their goals are, it helps us get them on a path to knowing what their choices are. For example, some organizations that aren't reporting on ESG but might want to, we want to make sure that we choose a building that will enable them to separately submeter for electric, because you can't report on what you can't measure. But we've even taken it a step further, and we've also put into our leases the ability to separately meter for water. They may never do that, but if they have that built in, it affords them that opportunity to do that over time. And building that team up front, I think I harp on that, but that's really an important part. And if we know that they're interested in that aspect of social sustainability and other certifications, we're going to want to make sure that our partners, architectural firms, project managers, understand that and have experience in it, because there's things that we can do early on that will make it more cost effective to do so. And understanding what you can, as I mentioned, kind of draft off the base building can really help, particularly from a system standpoint. When we did ASID and Car Properties had never heard of it, they were really progressive, and they brought in what is now UL, that had been Healthy Buildings, to partner up on that, not just on their side, but to work with us collaboratively. We had to figure out what had to be done from an HVAC. Things have evolved now that there's a lot more systems in HVAC, MERV filtration, lighting choices. When we did it, there was one lighting solution that would allow them to achieve a high level of WELL certification. That's much more mainstream now. But like I said, kind of knowing that up front, building that into our request for proposals, they're pretty extensive. We have exhibits on there that we want landlords to fill out on what they're doing. We're even looking to them to tell us what certifications they have. And my thinking has evolved. It's not like I'm not learning every day, but we used to say, we want you to have a WELL certification or a Fitwel. Well, those are could be 1 to 3 years depending on what you do. We actually want them to have it over the life of the lease.
You jump to a little bit of a different topic, but you talk about negotiating leases. And we're in a pretty challenging period of time right now where the valuations of buildings is changing very dramatically. And I'm curious what you're seeing, from the, financing, the landlord's ability to execute, being able to get the deals done in this kind of market.
It's hard. I would share that the evolution over the last 5 years of seeing where things are in the market, I have to give a little of that background because I think it sets it up. But we had a period where if people were prepared to make decisions in 21 and 22, we were able to achieve transactions of a sort that we never had done before in terms of the amount of the tenant improvements, the rent abatement, and landlords just wanted to get deals done. But with higher interest rates and impending loan maturations, we've actually seen, not all, I don't mean to insinuate that there's not opportunities to get it done, but it's a lot harder. If a landlord has a loan coming due, they're going to be less inclined to want to fund a large package. And in order to design a space that's going to align with what tenants want, we're going to need it. We are seeing some construction costs come down, potentially a little bit, but it's still more expensive to build with the glass and everything else like that. And so we're seeing some landlords either want to build out spec suites and you take them as is, or if we want to do it, we're going to have to wait and see what happens with some landlords where the lender is going to take back the building. They're going to do a short sale. We're seeing an abundance of those. And then the basis in the building will be lower and the new owner will be more well positioned. And I'm seeing that on a number of transactions right now. There's still across the board a lot of landlords that are able to transact, but our due diligence on that has become all the more critical. Landlords historically want to really drill down deep on the tenants and understand their financial. While the tables are turned, it's now a two-way street. And so an integral part of our process is really looking at that and assessing the health of the landlord, making sure, for example, that our client's real estate attorney is involved earlier on to make sure that we're protecting the tenant and their rights, to make sure that the funds that we work so hard to get are actually there for them to use.
I would say there's a lot of complexity to putting these deals together, and making sure that everybody's on the same page. I would imagine it involves a lot of education and communication and change management, and I'm curious how you navigate through those complexities, with the number of people that are involved.
Well, I'm glad you brought that up because the change management piece, while it's not new, our involvement with it is newer. And Savills has a newer change management division, which is really playing an integral role, because if you design a new space and you just tell people to come back and you don't explain why you've made these changes and help them understand how it can benefit them, not only have you squandered a valuable opportunity, it may set up for failure. And so having that type of involvement early on, I mentioned the workplace piece, but a lot of it also is a lot more consultative. I think that's one thing that's important to say, that we look at this a lot earlier. Our process used to be driven more by lease expiration. It still matters, but it matters less if somebody has a lease coming up, to think about what their needs are, and then we'll deal with that and address it. And so having all of those other pieces early on really matters, and it takes a lot longer. I mean, I mentioned, for example, Farmer Mac. We were hired in March of 2020. They just moved in this spring. We had a similar situation with a government contracting firm, Answer, who we were hired at the end of 20. They also moved in this spring. These projects can take longer, and the amount of time that it takes to get a space designed, permitted, and built is considerably longer. So it's about managing expectations, schedule, really helping people understand that the schedule is dynamic and it will change, but we want to help them understand that early due diligence with our partners from workplace, with the understanding what the change management component will be more at the end, and the architect, and getting them to a point where we've done our studies And then there's sort of an inflection point, depending on which path they want to go on, whether it's to dispose of their current space, restructure their lease, or move, that we're going to may have a period where we're pencils down. And so that's taking a lot longer to get done.
I'm curious, without throwing anybody under the bus, is there a part of the process that's more challenging or more difficult to get through?
It is so much harder to get deals done than it's ever been. I think that every time we thought we had something done, we would have to pivot, whether it was a board member or the client or the building. So I think in the current market, it's really making sure we can get something done from a financial standpoint that's made it a lot harder. And then I think the other thing that's the hardest is figuring out what people really want. You know, we do this upfront, really thoughtful planning on workplace, but then people's needs continue to change, and we need to help them with spaces, both from the architectural standpoint that are flexible, as well as the lease structure that are flexible. For example, well, we always try to do it. We're really striving to have landlords agree to give us a period of time once a lease is signed to increase or decrease how much space we need, because it matters.
So I'm curious, if you look out over the next few years with all the change that's occurring, how do you think the office will evolve over the next few years?
Well, the good news is I don't think it's going away. We talked a little bit about market, and we have seen a big flight to quality. So the higher end spaces actually have much lower vacancy rates or availability rates, which we track more. I think that we're going to still see a lot more of that commodity space sitting out there, which creates opportunities for people that have vision and or capital, and or that may want to own a building. But I do think that the office will continue to evolve. It will be a destination, but being intentional and strategic about creating an environment where people will want to come is critically important for the retention and attraction, and then that messaging piece of it that so many people miss. I will share another little anecdote. One of our clients, I think captures it perfectly, one of our clients is called Prefect, and they just moved into, literally like a week ago, a spec suite in Skanska's new building at 2112 Pennsylvania. Beautiful floor-to-ceiling glass, lots of light. And they had a blog post called "Don't Call It an Office, Rethinking Collaboration in a Remote First World." And they wanted to create a culture that was compelling enough that people would choose to come together even when they didn't have to. And when I think about what the future of the office is, it's that. And the pandemic took trends that were already there and accelerated them. People forget that people were not in the office 5 days a week. And I think that I can look to you for some of those statistics, but I believe they said it was really like 60% of the time. It's not as bad as people thought, but when everything shut down for some period of time, then they wondered. But people were on vacation, or people were sick, or they were traveling. So just trying to figure out what that new is. But it's created opportunities. It's been great for, in particular, for working mothers to have some flexibility, and people in general, to show that we can work remotely, but that we do better when we come together in the office.
Talking a little bit about how the use of the office is changing, I'm curious if you see any of the metrics that we use to measure the performance of the office change.
Yes, I think that, particularly because I've done a lot of law firm work, all of our metrics of square feet per attorney, they don't carry the same weight that they used to. We can't figure it out. Yeah, or even just square foot per employee. I think that's changed, and I think that we'll look to the architectural community, Bob, to kind of lead the new thinking on how you can evaluate that. How many people, for example, can be accommodated, breaking it down with private offices, workstations, collaborative spaces, and then how does that play out into how many days a week are people in, or hoteling. I think that has changed so dramatically, but I think there's a recognition that it's okay, that what we had looked to in the past was a metric for a point in time, but that we have to be flexible and think about that through a little bit of a different lens, and that I think it's taken away a lot of the absolutes, and that the law firms, for example, would say, like in the past, we're 1,000 square feet per per attorney, and now is it 600, but is that a headquarters office? And how many days a week are people coming in? And the administrative support ratios have changed. I mean, they're radically different from what they were earlier in my career.
I'll say the real estate industry was probably driven by efficiency. It was always square footage per person, which was the holy grail.
Mm-hmm.
And now I think you're starting to see that change. One, that's much more difficult to measure,
Mm-hmm.
but I think you're also starting to see organizations that look at the work environment as a tool that, you know, can advance their business, you know, or help them to achieve their strategic objectives. You know, but haven't seen any metrics that correlate to that yet.
Some of the furniture companies, Steelcase and others, you know, are starting to do some of that research. There's some really great thought leadership out there. You've interviewed a lot of them. But I think that recognition that it's just a whole new world, actually, I find it quite exciting. I mean, yes, during the, as I call it, deep, dark pandemic, you know, we weren't sure that anyone would ever go back. And I remember like the amenity war, like, who cares? Nobody's ever going to want to come together and be unmasked. And that's change. And I think it's that purpose and creating culture. We've got a culture committee within locally and nationally, and it's really thinking hard about why people want to come in. Yes, it's easy to do it with food and drinks, but it needs to be more than that. And it's bringing people together as a community to get that stickiness.
For somebody that's just starting out, thinking about the next iteration of their office, any suggestions for where they should start or how they should look at the process?
Besides hiring me,
That's a given.
They should be open to, like I said, not thinking that it should just be driven by a lease expiration or that they own a building, because there's solutions. We're creative, we are problem solvers, but starting early and being open and flexible and building the right team. I mentioned to you that I found that my business and our industry has changed, and it's far more consultative than it's ever been. And that's a different lens. There may or may not be a transaction at the end, but leveraging all of the tools, and I'm pretty excited just within my own company at Savills, both domestically as well as nationally, we have more resources. I mentioned change management, I mentioned workplace, project management, but we also have a whole group called Savills Earth. I've been deeply involved with a lot of our discussion about sustainability and ESG, and all of those things play into it. And I think it's, from that standpoint, it's an exciting time. And tenants still, for the most part, are in the driver's seat, but they do need to be thinking about it a little bit earlier and a little bit.
Good. Wendy, we've covered a broad range of topics, and this has been a great conversation. I'm wondering if there's anything I left out that you feel you need to address.
We didn't even talk about equity, but a big part of what the International Well Building Institute is talking about equity. And I think that matters, that people are looking to not just have the traditional, if you do have private offices, you know, all on the perimeter, they're trying to sometimes bring them more inboard so that the people who are at workstations can be on the window, but using glass so everyone gets light. And I think that people care about what the employee wants, provided that we can also have this make economic sense. We can't do it in a vacuum, but people want a different feel. And so I'm in the business of helping deliver that with partners to get there. And nothing makes me happier than when a client says, this really resonates. I share with you that quote from Prefect. And I'd sent them Skanska, who I think is really also one of the ones that's really at the forefront from a sustainability standpoint, had sent out a marketing piece about the building. They have a few spaces left. And in it, they talked about that they had achieved well, and they had Fitwel, and they had Energy Star, and that all of these things in terms of air quality, and they listed all of them. And I sent it to the client, and I said, this is why you've chosen this building, and you need to let your employees know. And they said, this is exactly spot on. So I think helping with that messaging is really important, partnering up with their marketing department to help them communicate it to their employees, I think is really key. But you want to build a place, and you want to build a company that people want to be at. And I think that's what really matters. And that's where I got so excited about, you know, my passion for focusing on wellness, and that the pandemic just created this opportunity where all of a sudden it accelerated this focus on it, and that more and more companies and law firms and association really do care about their employees And what are ways that they can do that? Through design, through building selection, and through communicating what they've done and why they chose a particular building or why they chose the materials, and they care about sustainability because, not to get political, but like climate change and all of that, it all plays into it. I'm still excited about the future, that there are opportunities abound. It requires us to think differently and to collaborate differently, and those partnerships really matter. And so the future is bright. It's just a lot different.
Great. No, I'm fascinated with all that's going on. So thank you very much. This has been a great conversation, and I appreciate you taking the time to sit with us and discuss what you see out there.
Thank you for the opportunity.